Well, this one is going to take a lot of courage for me to tell you about. In a recent audio with Douglas, I told you about my experience with the guardian of the threshold. I was 21 years old. I was at Florida State. I was working on my master's degree in humanities. I was not involved in the esoteric, new age, anything like that. I was approaching humanities from an academic way of looking and approaching it. The things that I experienced, I had no understanding of. And to wake up early in the morning and see this man, or an image of what I saw as a man in a hood and a cloak holding these three Greek letters at the foot of my bed was, what is this? And of course, I knew you can't tell people about any of these experiences. And you may have had the similar thing happen to you where you have these experiences and you cannot tell anybody because they'll lock you away. So I had these things happen to me all my life, ever since I was a little girl. And I had learned you just zip it up and you don't talk about it. So once again, here was another event that now, when I look back, I realize that these are glimmerings of the spiritual world that we perceive from our physical senses, but without an understanding of what that is, it just is such a mystery. After I left Florida State, I went to the University of Manchester to continue studying, but this time it was in economics. I was very interested in this European Union that was being formed. And I can say that with that event, the most I took away was being told by a member of the Oldham Rotary Club, because I was a Rotary, not Rhodes, a Rotary scholar over in Manchester with the Oldham Rotary Club, was he took me aside and he told me that America was not independent like we thought. It was actually a colony of England, of Great Britain, that is. He did not mean the English people. He was talking about the British monarchy. And that's what I took away from that trip. And it had bothered and nudged at me in my brain for a long time. But anyway, had to leave all that aside. Had to get a job, had two children. Life was going on. And I had moved to Tampa, Florida. I was looking for things to do, new classes. I'm just a perpetual student. I love to learn anything new. And so I saw this class, and it was called The World Within. It was run by a woman named Buffy Black, and she was known in the area, in the Tampa Bay area at the time. And we're talking about 1984. And she was known to be a clairvoyant, and she'd read cards. So she was, somewhat known by the locals. My mother-in-law asked me if I'd like to go to this class. Did I just tell you? It's called The World Within. I was so fascinated. What did that mean? And the description of the class said it was going to teach you about being clairvoyant, what the spiritual world was. Most importantly, they would teach you how to meditate. And I didn't know about meditation. I had seen things back in 1984. It was just coming up. There was trans meditation, or transcendental meditation is what it was called, and all these types of things. But I always had this well, now I can understand it was a resonance. If I don't feel resonance with something, it causes discord. I usually don't approach it. So none of these types of meditation were resonating with me, and I stayed away from it. I didn't want to be in any kind of cult. But this class interested me, and because my mother-in-law invited me, I thought, well, why not go? Now, this class would change my life forever, not the class per se, but what happened. And I hope you don't mind that I'm so personal about this, but I've waited 38 years to be able to tell you this story with the hope that it will bring some comfort to you, as it has me over all these years, that there is something truly magnificent just beyond the veil of our material existence. So when we went to the class, it was at in Seminole Beach at a little community center, and we were all sitting around in a circle, and Buffy was leading us in a meditation. She played Pachelbel canon, and she would come around to each of us sitting in the circle, and she would rub her hands like this over your head. She said she was cleansing your aura. Oh, I was so excited. The anticipation was just dying. I couldn't wait for her to come over and to, cleanse my aura, whatever that meant. And she did. And she came over and she rubbed on the top of my head. She didn't touch me. She just rubbed the energy, her hands together, and the energy, and kind of cleared it out. Wow. Immediately, I just left my body. Now, this, folks, this is a first time experience for me. I leave my body to the point that I had to get up out of my chair and walk outside. It was so intense. I was being guided to walk outside. So I did. And Buffy and the rest of the class followed me. I was like in a trance. And I walk outside, and there on the ground is a little piece of cellophane. It was, at the bottom, how the cigarette packages come in the cellophane. So I picked this up, and as soon as I picked it up, it burst into the most amazing love and light that you cannot imagine it. It was so intense. Now, the people around me of course, they couldn't see the experience I was having, but they saw me in my countenance, and they said it only lasted a few seconds. But for me, it lasted in that moment and for eternity. But then again, it's been with me every single day since 1984. Every day I relive this amazing experience. What was it? I came out of it, and people asked me, well, what happened? And I said, well, the only way that I can explain it is, you remember that story in the Bible where Saul is walking down the road and he's struck by light, and then that is his conversion and he becomes Paul? Well, that was the only way I could explain it. My religious background was spotty at best. I had been raised an Episcopalian, but I just found it so lacking in so many ways for what I was experiencing myself. And the church had such limitations to it, but I was always a Christian. And so I could liken it to a story in the Bible, and I could liken that love and light to the experience of seeing Christ. Now, many years later, I would have the words to explain these events, but then in that moment, friends, I didn't have anything, just myself and this big, huge experience. Well, I had to find out what it was. Now, in 1984, I know it's hard to believe for you or who are younger, we didn't have the internet. It wasn't like I could go home and open up my iPad and, search these words that I had experienced and find anything meaningful. That just wasn't going to happen. But what I did was I started reading books, anything that I could get my hands on. Now, where you would find those books in the day were back in the bookstores. You'd look under the metaphysical area, and it wasn't even called New Age back then. It was witchcraft and all this kind of stuff. And those vibes didn't resonate with me, but it was the only place that I could find some books that might help me understand what this was. I never found answers in those books. This was also during the time where you had these different kinds of spiritual leaders that would come and give lectures at hotels, and you would go and you would listen. And so I went to all of them that were down there in the Tampa Bay area at the time. Let's see, there was this Maharishi person that came, and then Jay-Z Knight came channeling Ramtha, and I went to all of them, and I always went with an open mind, but I didn't connect with any of them. This was simply not the resonance that I had experienced. So I had to let it go, and I had to get a job, because by that time my family thought I was a nut. They had taken my children away from me, and I had no job. I lived in my van for a short time until I could get an apartment, and I had to get my feet on the ground and get real with the world. I knew I wasn't going crazy. My experience was very real, but I didn't have any answers. So what I did is I just prayed that I would be given guidance. And I was given guidance. And I have been given guidance every step of the way since then. And that's why I want to tell you my story. Because if I tell you this story, and you know that I had the faith all these years to carry through, perhaps it would give you courage and faith to continue on. We're in difficult, very difficult times in the world. My goodness, we're looking at global genocide. Many of us will experience this very personally. In early 1985, I started getting messages, and they were coming from another dimension. That's now, again, at the time that this is happening, I don't have the words to explain this. So when I do, and it sounds articulate, know that then, as a young woman of 28, without knowledge of any of this, I hadn't even been introduced to anthroposophy at this time. These are the ways that I would describe it now, but that's certainly not the way it was for me then. but I was receiving messages from another dimension. They were very real. It was telling me very clearly over and over again. And I mean, so many ways that it was coming at me of these messages that I needed to go down to Miami Beach and I needed to go to Wolfie's. Wolfie's is or I don't know if it's still around. It's a deli, a famous deli in Miami Beach. And I needed to be there at 3 o'clock. And I would just stand at the entrance, and then the people would come and get me, and then they would take me to a place where my experience would be explained, or I'd have some kind of understanding of this experience. Now, when I look back at it, and later having been introduced to anthroposophy, which I find remarkable that at Florida State University in the humanities department at the time that I was there was no course on Rudolf Steiner or anthroposophy. I had never heard of Rudolf Steiner. I was introduced to him shortly after my experience, began to read anthroposophy, found that it was very good because it grounded me. It was a spiritual science that seemed logical, reasonable, and it wasn't Luciferic. And Luciferic is the word that I would use when I went down to Wolfie's. And I also knew not to say anything to anybody. And this confession that I have for you today, only the closest friends of mine know about this, and now you do. So I prepared myself. I said, well, I have to go. This is crazy, but I'm going to have to go down there and see what's there. So I left, got in my van, and I drove down to Miami, stood there at the threshold. Isn't that interesting? At the threshold of Wolfie's, looking into the room where people were having their fantastic deli sandwiches. And there were a few men. They were dressed in white. They looked at me and waved at me and told me to come to their table. So I knew I was where I needed to be. Now, the men always looked reptilian to me. I didn't know why. In years to come, I'd call them the reptile people. I knew that there was an element of evil around them, but I knew I was protected. Today, I would call it Luciferic. I was having a Luciferic experience, and these were Luciferic beings. These were demons. Maybe people in the world could see them, and maybe they weren't seen as reptile people, but for me, they looked like reptiles. But I wasn't scared because I wanted to know, what was this experience of this most amazing love and light? So they told me that they were going to take me, that we would have to spend the night. So we would get going first thing in the morning. We went to a seedy little hotel in Miami Beach to spend the night, and they were joined by other people. There I was in a room full of, I don't know, maybe there were 3 or 4 men, all reptilian looking, and then a woman came in at some point. Oh, let me tell you, how dangerous was this? I had no idea that there was human trafficking in the world or that things could happen to me. I was 28, very naive about the world, but there I was. And even in the middle of the night when I was sleeping, the thought occurred to me that maybe harm would come to me, but yet I felt an ease that no harm would come. In the morning, when I'm very excited, they're getting ready I'm going to follow them wherever they're going, follow in my car. That's what they tell me. And I'm getting ready to go. They say they have to step out. They're going to go get some breakfast, but they never came back. And in fact, what happened is, and you can check this out, on May 17th, 1985, around 11:30, all the lights went out in Miami Beach. It apparently affected most of South Florida. Everything went off. And that's how I made my escape. I realized that I was in the wrong place. These were not the right people. I got in my van and I drove back home, crying all the way because I still didn't have an answer. I will say my comfort on that drive back was Van Morrison. What great tunes Van had back in the day of the spiritual world. He was the only one that could really connect with me in that way. Later, I would find anthroposophy, as I mentioned, and it would ground me, and I would be able to express myself and understand what it is to be on a spiritual journey. When I look back 38 years, a distance, and with having been a student of anthroposophy, and will say to you, I'm a student of anthroposophy, whereas Douglas is a scholar of anthroposophy. This is why I always yield to him when he speaks about anthroposophy. But the reason I'm telling you even this story today is because Douglas isn't here. He's on his trip. And I can never seem to have the opportunity to tell you about my story. Douglas has a remarkable story himself. He's been so many places. He's affected so many people. And then you look at Michael, he's an amazing inventor, such an amazing Christian man. And, he has never asked me about my story. And Douglas has never asked me about this story. So I'm just taking a little time while they're away to tell you this. So looking back, I can say that experience for me was a birth into another level of awareness. It was like there were veils, and there are veils that stay between our world here in our physical material world, and then we have the spiritual world just beyond. And it's just the slightest of veils. And those veils were pulled apart. Those curtains were rendered apart, and I could experience and see what lies just beyond. And in this love and life, I had no love and light. I had no fear. There is no fear. We are so loved beyond what you can imagine. And what is the light? The light is truth. And the truth was so blinding. And in that moment, I was told that I needed to tell people about this experience. My girlfriend, Judy Bacon, who has been with me through all these years by my side, encouraged me then, and she has encouraged me every year, that I needed to write a book about this experience. People need to know that there is this experience and that there is something beyond the material and the physical world. And what had happened is it was birthed into another level of awareness. And in this birth, I had Luciferic demons that were coming to attack me, but they had no power over me because I had Christ. And with Christ and wearing your shield of armor, nothing evil can approach you because you have a different resonance. You don't vibrate on the frequency that they can grab you at. That's why they need to instill fear in all of us, because they need to lower our resonance to a frequency like they have. The reptile people have a lower resonance, and they create fear everywhere to get you to vibrate in that lower resonance. So Judy said I should write a book, and every year she would say, have you written that book? And I couldn't write the book because a book is cover to cover. It's a linear experience. You read the pages. Those are two-dimensional planes of words that come into your consciousness that create images. And my experience was so big, a book would never contain it or explain it. Later in 2010, many of you know that I was very upset about what was going on. We had the Twin Towers collapsing in 2001, and then 2008, the housing crisis, and you could just see the world fraying and falling apart. I wanted to do something. I had to do something. I had read enough of anthroposophy to realize that Ahriman actually incarnates in a physical body. I don't know who that is, and I don't care, because all I need to do is to approach that energy, see it for what it is, and then it'll dissipate. So the way I did that is I decided to take a trip to the White House. If you remember, in the summer of 2010, Glenn Beck was having that big rally in Washington, D.C., and I thought, well, that's a perfect time to go. I can see how big this movement really is, and I made my reservation to walk the White House. And when I was walking the White House, what I wanted to do was to pick up the energy and just bring it into me. I didn't judge it. I didn't know what would happen of it, but it was more of a walkabout for picking up the energy. And I have more stories to tell about that. That's not where we're going to go right now. Later, I would meet Douglas. And it was kind of funny because at the time, and this was back in 2011, I was on eHarmony looking to find somebody maybe who could share a little bit of the journey with me, knowing that there probably was nobody. But I was also looking for someone who could be a ghostwriter, because I knew the book I did not have the capacity to explain what I had seen. When you get a spiritual experience like this, it can take you years to unpack the experience. And it's taken decades to unpack it. But I knew that to get started, I would have to have somebody who was deeply connected to the academics of religion and philosophy, who deeply understood it and who also understood anthroposophy. Well, as I've told you before, with my story on the bees, and I could tell you story after story, whatever I want, whatever I need, I send that thought out to the universe. It always comes back to me. And there was Douglas. He shows up on eHarmony. And then I get talking to him on the first phone call or two, and I was like going, oh my gosh, what an amazing thinker, a genius. Oh, I was in love with him before I ever saw him, and it was a good thing. And it was amazing. And I asked him when we started to date, I told him about a book. I said, I've got to write this book. I don't know how to describe it. It has to be experiential. It has to be one that the reader will also be able to experience as they're reading. Well, I've come to learn that, of course, it would be more than a book. It would be a book that became 3 books, that became Douglas's book, that became our adventures on the internet, became all that you've experienced to this point. I have a lot of things to tell you, but it'll take courage. I need to know that this is something that you would want to hear, because if you don't want to hear it, I'm just not going to go there, because it's so highly personal. Give me some fortitude. I'll need it. I have so many stories of things that I think would resonate with you. And why you? Because you went through the big ugly with this. And I think that you have to see. No, I know. You have to see evil. If you want to ascend, you have to see the evil in the world the way it really is. And that's what Douglas and I did with you from the day that we picked up the stories in the internet and started running with our YouTube videos and started writing our articles. We were as much a student of these things as you were. You were going along with us as we told you how corrupt the swamp was. Douglas he's a genius. I know his IQ. I don't care to tell you that right now, but believe me, he wouldn't have been working for the NSA and doing all the things that he's done without an extremely high IQ. He was able to help me construct what this book would be. But for me, I had to go beyond the book, because I knew that social media networking was going to be so big in the way that small non-state actors like me by myself could influence the world, including the politics. When I stumbled on Michael McKibben's site, we were doing research. We had done the 9/11 research with Heidner's report. When we had seen Heidner's report, it was so dense. I asked Douglas to look through it. He did. He spent months on it. And then we were able to write a citizen intelligence report on what really happened on 9/11, which certainly satisfied me, because I had been seeking where Congress isn't there to help us. And we know why now. Their committees and their investigations would never take us to the truth. But we found the truth with Heidner's work. And we have it on our site at Aim for Truth if you care to read it. So when I ran across Michael's site, of course, I didn't know who Michael McKibben was, called AmericansForInnovation.blogspot.com. Oh my goodness, it was so dense. It was so dense. I knew there was something there. But what I could tell, and I would tell Douglas, this guy, he claims to have invented social media networking. He claims that it was stolen. I think that we could be helpful. I think we could show him that the point where it was stolen was where he was interfacing with the Highlands Forum group. So we made our introduction to Michael, and he's been a part of our story in telling the truth and telling you what's really going on in the world. There are not a lot of people that can resonate with our material because it's very intense. But you, on the other end, you've been with us. You've been through, you've seen the evil, you see where it is. You have a capacity to know that there's more, and there is more. These problems are not going to be solved in the political sphere. We have the Pilgrim Society that's running the world. They've run everything for centuries. And so how do we overcome this? We need to do this in a different way. And let me say that in my experience of love and light, I know that I'm always protected. And as I'm standing right here in this moment, in this spot talking to you, I am protected. I can tell you that nothing happens to me, nothing harms me. And that's why I'm seeking 47 other people to also understand and hold this truth. Stand on your ground. No harm is going to come to you, then no harm is going to come to the earth, because the earth is not going to, how can the earth hold you? Because no harm's going to come to you. No harm's going to come to me. I've seen it. I can give you so many examples of how treacherous situations have been for me, and no harm has come to me. The planet will be fine. But we need to take it another level. We need 47 more of you. I should say 46, because Douglas holds this ground with me, that your country will be fine. Your country is going to survive this because you are protected, and your family. And you just keep drilling it down to where you stand and know that you are protected. You put on that coat of armor, this spiritual coat of armor, which is the protection of Jesus Christ, which is an accumulation of your good karma, so that no one has an ability to attack you because of this karma. They can't attack us. They can't harm you. The only thing they can do is to bring you to a state of fear. And if they can bring you to a state of fear, you will do harm to yourself. They won't need to do it to you. So in closing today's segment, I would just give you my testimony. I have experienced a world beyond the physical material world. It is so real. It's so unbelievable. That's where I'm journeying to. This is my beacon, my light. And every day I try to take a step closer to understanding the experience.